Okay, we started the recording as well. Okay, so what we intend to say today in Unit 11, first of all, the distribution of marks, that means the topic and subtopics that you are going to get from Unit 11, and which topics to focus more, which topics to focus less, like every single unit preparation. We'll do the same again. Okay, so first things first, let me divide unit number 11 into, let's go here. Let me divide unit number 11 into 3-4 different units. Can you see the cursor here? Can you see the pointer? Because earlier there was a problem of not seeing the pointer. I've changed the device. Okay, then it's a problem. Anyway, so what we intend to talk here is unit number 11 can be divided into different sections. Section number 1, it will be like origin of life. This is one thing. From origin of life, they will ask you question like, they will ask you the different steps of origin of life, that is the chemical evolution of life, questions from there. And they will also ask you questions from the quasarvates, the protobionts, and Haldane soup, oparin and Haldane theory, then the idea of Urey-Miller experiment, and all these things. They will ask you questions from there. So you need to understand these things very clearly. Okay, you will expect at least 1 to 2 questions from origin of life. That's one thing. The second thing they will ask question from is the organic evolution. And the organic evolution is another very interesting and important part. From organic evolution, they will ask you questions like 1 to 2 questions again, because it's a macro evolution, and here where the Darwin's idea of evolution will be applicable. Along with that, they will also ask you questions from the convergent evolution, divergent evolution, parallel evolution, causes of evolution like natural selection, and the outcome of evolution like mass extinction and stuff like that. Third thing that is important here is the population genetics. Now this is very important part, including Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. So this is where you will get 2 questions. You will get to answer 1 to 2 questions again. So, and also fourth one is geological time scale, 1 question from there. So in a sense you can get like 5 to 8 questions possible from module number 11, somewhere ranging between 5-6 questions they ask every year from unit number 11. Now why I break this down into 4 different subtopics, because remember one thing, no matter if you prepare only one subtopic, snubbing the other, it will not help, because no matter how much you prepare the Hardy-Weinberg, you will be able to get maximum 2 questions from there. So that is the reason you should prepare one unit completely, like all different subtopics should be prepared, not just 1 or 2 subtopics. Got it? That is the idea of behind all this information that I'm sharing now. Okay, let's come back here. Okay, so let's start to talk about the different scale of evolution. We call it the multi-scale process of evolution. Now evolution, the term of evolution is applied to understand how exactly all the organisms that we see to be existing these days have been originated from the common ancestor, because we know that all the individuals that we can see now, they share a common ancestor, because all of us are connected, because we can see the similarity between us. We can see the morphological similarity, the anatomical similarity, and molecular similarity. Those are the proofs for the evolution, stating that definitely we have a common ancestor somewhere. But to understand that evolution, we can break different scales of evolution. For example, the evolution to talk about and the origin of life to talk about at the primary level, we need to understand the cosmic evolution. Cosmic evolution deals with the development of the growth of the earth. Growth of the earth means the birth of the earthly atmosphere that now we know about the earth, because now we know the earth contains oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, gases. Now how exactly these gases cease to present in the atmosphere, and those things are answered with the help of the cosmic evolution. And then the geological scale of evolution. Geological scale of evolution states the the concentration of biomolecules in the greenstone hydrothermal vent environments, and different molecules with the similar structures shared between them, known as homochiral monomers, the production of all this. That is the geological scale of evolution. Then the chemical scale of evolution is the one which is very, very important and required for the CSIR NET exam practice. While chemical evolution tells us the insight regarding how exactly the primary environment of the earth helps to produce the early and first living organism of the earth. Now how exactly they can do that possibly, that's the chemical evolution. And in chemical evolution we will talk about how exactly for those inorganic compounds that are present in the environment slowly being converted into the organic compounds, and then slowly those organic compounds are converted to a living organism. We'll talk about that sequentially. And then finally the biological evolution, while we are talking about cells which are replicating, cells which are making copies of itself so that it can transfer the genetic material from its generation to the next generation, continuing like that. So evolution, when we start to talk about evolution, we are not talking about any one particular scale. We are talking about the cosmic level. We are talking and connecting that cosmic level of evolution with the chemical evolution, and then connecting the chemical evolution with the organic or biological evolution. So let's first talk about the overview of how origin of life could have existed. Now no one knows the origin of life clearly because we still don't have substantial proof of how life has originated, but what we know are different facts, different. With the help of multiple experiments we gain information, and those information help us to understand the most possible way an inorganic compound can give rise to organic compounds, because that is really, really important. Why that is important? The answer to that is because earlier at the Earth atmosphere we did not have any organic molecules or any organisms living in that condition. But what we knew was that all the inorganic materials are present, inorganic compounds are present in the atmosphere. So all those inorganic compounds that are present in the atmosphere, those inorganic compounds definitely give rise to some of the organic compounds which are the building blocks of life. So what are such examples? Like proteins, okay, examples like lipids, example like carbohydrates, polysaccharides, all those components, nucleic acids, which are the building blocks of life. So presence of all those components actually prove that our life is being formed. So earlier, definitely from those inorganic compounds that are present in the environment somehow help to produce the organic compounds, and this becomes a very primary step to the evolutionary journey, and that is entirely the chemical evolution. So chemical evolution teaches us how inorganic compounds produce organic compound, okay, and we'll talk about that in more details. Okay, so this idea of chemical evolution is very, very important, and even before the idea of chemical evolution there are multiple theory and there are multiple ideas regarding how life has been originated, and all those ideas, they don't have any scientific ground. They are just vague ideas, like abiogenesis theory. Those are present earlier. Abiogenesis theory states that the living organisms are created from the non-living things. For example, we have inanimate thing or non-living thing, let's say what you can say, rice in the storage. So when the rice bag is there in the storage, you put some water into it, and slowly mouse start to form from those rice. That is not exactly the true things, because there is no scientific ground to explain that theory. So but that theory was present for a long time, which was disproved by the tireless effort of Louis Pasteur to explain the origin of life with the help of biogenesis, not abiogenesis. So when we talk about the biogenetic theory, that is the live or living organisms are created from a living organism, but what we know here is that inorganic compounds can give rise to the organic compound, because that's kind of a missing link, because we know that at the end we have the organisms, and organisms means living organisms mean they carry more and more carbohydrate, like hydrocarbon chains. In all these places, organic compound means they should have hydrocarbon chains. So how exactly such hydrocarbon chains and structures like that has been originated? While the atmosphere contains methane, atmosphere contains ammonia, hydrogen, and water vapor, those things, how come this ammonia, methane, hydrogen converted into this hydrocarbon? That is a missing link, and that was prescribed by Oparin and Haldane. And they prescribed a very simple hypothesis stating that why not these inorganic compounds can be linked, why not these inorganic compounds can be fused to produce an organic hydrocarbon. But what they stated is that for this process to occur, two things are mandatory. What are those two things? The thing number one that is mandatory is energy, because for this reaction to occur, they need energy to continue with. So they need energy in the very first place. Second thing that is required is water. So without water it is not possible, and we know that water plays very important role in our life, in every single living organism's life, because without water most of the chemical reactions are not possible, digestion is not possible, many physiological activities are not possible. So while for the life to originate, it's very important that they get sufficient water, and also they need the supply of energy. So both these things together, supply of energy and the presence of water, is required. So they prescribe this idea that the life must have been originated in the ocean, because at the very beginning, while the earth was formed, the environmental temperature is not that cool. The environment is very hot, and hydrothermal vents are there, and it's like the earth's surface is boiling like magma. So it was not very much pleasant. But what happens here is that they need to cool down the temperature. So the life forms right after the earth's temperature cools down, and earth's temperature, for the cooling of earth's temperature, is very important that rainfall start to happen, because the atmosphere start to be modified and there is a condensation, and due to the condensation rainfall is done, and as a result of the rainfall, all those different surface of the earth which carries holes and structures are getting filled by the water of the rainfall. Sooner the oceans are created and the aquatic environment has been created. Once the aquatic environment is created, then they get this water, the availability of water, and in the water they have those earthly or atmospheric inorganic compounds like methane, like ammonia, hydrogen, water. All these things are present. Now the only thing they require is energy, and the energy is supplied definitely by the lightning, because at the early atmosphere it was not very stable. So lightning provides energy, and that energy will help to be utilized by those inorganic compounds to produce organic compounds. But this idea, this was just an hypothesis, but this hypothesis is not backed by Haldane and Oparin and Haldane themselves. Many years later, Urey and Miller has conducted an experiment to prove the Haldane-Oparin theory to be true. And what they did here, let me talk about that, then I'll come back to explain this idea. What they did is they created a reaction chamber where they provided all the inorganic compounds like methane, ammonia, water, hydrogen, and this is the reaction chamber where also introduce electrodes, because they can add spark, which will be the source of energy, replicating the idea of early atmospheres, lightning. So this is the situation, and there is a boiling water at one point. So boiling water evaporates, and the water moves inside that flask, the reaction flask, right? And then the energy provided by the spark can convert the inorganic compounds into the organic compounds. And then once the organic compounds are made, then they also made a place for condensing the environment and cooling the environment, as a result of which the compounds, they condensed and they are stored into another chamber. In the stored chamber, that is the resultant chamber, in the resultant chamber we have the products formed after the reaction, and it was quite surprising to see organic compounds present in that production chamber. And that gives us an important insight that proved the Oparin and Haldane hypothesis to be true. So what Oparin and Haldane stated is that once all those inorganic compounds like methane, ammonia, hydrogen, they are present in the aqueous environment, So Oparin and Haldane say that as a Haldane soup, because Haldane soup carries all those inorganic compounds. It's like, you know, they need a recipe. All the soup material is there. They need just a recipe to convert that ingredients into the final product, and that's what happened in this particular case. So they have this soup ready, right? So they have this soup prepared, but what happens in this Haldane soup? We have inorganic molecules. Now those inorganic molecules are converted to some simple organic compounds. Now those simple organic compounds start to interact together to what make macromolecules or complex organic compounds. Now the simple molecule means we are talking about amino acid to be produced, we're talking about fatty acids to be produced, we're talking about like few sugars, very basic sugars to be produced. Now those amino acids and fatty acids, they are not the structurally stable ingredients. So what they will do is that more and more amino acids, they will form protein, fatty acids will form lipid structures. So soon those amino acids will make proteins, fatty acids will make lipid. So once the structure is made, those will be known as complex macromolecules, or these macromolecules are actually the building blocks for the living organism. So they produce those macromolecules, and once they produce the macromolecules, so we have lipid, we have polysaccharide, we have proteins. Now all those proteins, polysaccharides, lipids, those are present in that aquatic environment, but all those macromolecules present in the aquatic environment as an aggregate, because they don't have any membrane to separate them from the rest of the environment, so they are not separated. In this case, they are just present, they are not separated at all. So that is those are known as aggregates, or also known as coacervates. Okay, coacervates are also, they are known as microspheres. The same thing, coacervates or microsphere. So microsphere or coacervate lacks a cell membrane outside, so it's like just an open system. The open system is present, and in this open system we have all the macromolecules, nothing to separate them from the rest of the environment. Now those coacervates, they start to have a separate lipid surrounding this aggregate. So let's say proteins and lipids, they're linked with one another, and then there is a cell membrane start to form and separates this aggregate from the rest of the environment, and that becomes another very important step for the chemical evolution. Okay, because when they start forming this cell membrane, the moment they form the cell membrane, it separates that aggregate out from the rest of the environment. Okay, and that is known as a protocell. This is the state where it is known as the protocell, or pro-primitive stage, before the formation of a true cell. We cannot call it a true cell because it is lacking its genetic material, but it has all the macromolecules, it has the cell membrane separating this cell from the rest of the environment. Okay, so it's a protocell. Now once a protocell is formed, the protocell and then they start forming what is known as a nucleic acid. Once the nucleic acid start to form, nucleic acid is built up. Once the nucleic acid is built up, then the addition of this nucleic acid to this cell, because nucleic acid will become the genetic material. So once nucleic acid is formed and nucleic acid becomes a part of the protocell, then the protocell is converted into self-replicating system. Then only we can call it a cell. But the cell that is produced is kind of a primitive, because it's not the actual mature cell. It's a primitive cell. It's very early type of cell. Now those primitive cells start to mature itself, and it will convert into what is known as a little modified version of the cell. We call it the prokaryotic cell or early cell. Then those prokaryotic cells slowly start to have the modification, and the prokaryotic cells start modifying into eukaryotic cell. Then slowly the other types of cell that we can see nowadays, even till the point till human production of not only cell but organisms with multiple cells, and then even modified version of those kind of organisms, and until human production, like the evolution of the human. So all these things are produced from that very premature protocell. So all of us that are living now, all the organisms living now, the early ancestor for us is always there. That single protocell, that single primitive cell are our ancestor at the very beginning. Okay, so this in a sense are the sequence of the organic evolution. Let me also explain that with the sequential idea, but one question still remains even after explaining this idea of starting from the Halden soup going to the primitive cell. The question is at the end, like once you produce the protocell, and we know the protocell plus nucleic acid means self-replicating system. But the question is, which of the nucleic acid acts as a genetic material, right? Because we have DNA, we have RNA. We know that proteins can no longer act as a genetic material. We know that. But what about the DNA or RNA? Which one among DNA and RNA act as a genetic material? The answer to that is very difficult, because earlier for a long period of time scientists believed that it may be DNA, because DNA is more stable. So at the very beginning DNA should be the genetic material, because it's more stable. It can give rise to RNA, and then RNA can be translated into proteins, and DNA can give rise to more DNA with the DNA replication. Those things can be done, right? But what we can say here is that after many different rounds of research regarding whether DNA and RNA can be the material, we found out interesting insight regarding RNA. Okay, why? Because it was found out that the RNA has some interesting feature that is lacking by the DNA. What are those features? The feature is, at the very beginning of the life, when we are talking about situations where one type of nucleic acid or one type of macromolecule needs to replace the work of the other macromolecule. So situation was something like that, which was not that easy. So at that point DNA cannot work all alone, because we still know that the DNA and associated enzymes, they cannot work on their own. DNA require many different enzymes to work to replicate and make another copy of the DNA, because the DNA polymerase is not all-in-one or versatile enzyme. So definitely whatever was the genetic material at the beginning, there is something which is more versatile, than the DNA, because RNA was more versatile than DNA. Because why? Because RNA, if we consider few properties of the RNA, you can see that RNA can act as a ribozyme or an enzyme. RNA can act as RNA itself, which can be translated into proteins. Second thing, RNA can act as a template to produce and guide to produce a version of DNA. That's also a truth. And third thing is RNA act as an enzyme. So RNA can acting as an enzyme, RNA acting as a RNA itself, which will be translated to proteins, and RNA can help producing more DNA. So as all these things are there regarding the RNA is true, it was thought that RNA has the potential to become the primary genetic material at the very beginning of the origin of life, because at that point there are very less specialization required. We need few molecules which can do multiple jobs, and RNA is capable of doing multiple jobs. RNA can act as an enzyme, RNA can act as RNA itself. It can also help to produce DNA copy, complementary DNA copy. So that makes RNA prime contender to become the primary genetic material while the life has been originated. So this idea is known as RNA world hypothesis, stating the idea that the RNA has more reasons to be called as the primary genetic material than DNA. Now, whatever thing that we discussed till now, we can summarize that in a nutshell here, and we can talk about it like, it begins from free atoms like hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, and from the atoms we have inorganic molecules to be prepared. From those inorganic molecules, simple organic molecules are prepared, like methane. From methane, water, ammonia, we prepare simple sugars, amino acids, purine, pyrimidines. Then complex organic molecules like polysaccharide, lipids, proteins, nucleotides. Then quasarvates, where these are the aggregates of all those molecules without the cell membrane. Then they form protobionts or protocells, where so protocell is a place where they have the cell membrane without the nucleic acid. Protobiont is a state where they have nucleic acid along with the quasarvate structure. And then finally primitive cell, where they have all those things. They have the lipoprotein membrane bound structures with enzyme controlled metabolism and nucleic acid mediated regulation. And that primitive cell is now ready to divide. Before they form the primitive cell, before they have the genetic material to be present in those cells, they cannot divide. Once they produce the primitive cell, then only they can divide. They can give rise to another cell, and from that cell more cells in the future generation. So then the idea of modification of like the idea of evolution works from one generation to the other, and things like that is possible. Okay, so from this part you can expect question in group C, you can expect question in group B. Both the type of question can be asked. Now let's move on and talk about the organic evolution in details. The organic evolution means we can divide them like results of evolution. We'll talk about that, like new species formation. We'll talk about cause of evolution. We'll talk about types of evolution, like types of evolution means adaptive radiation, convergent evolution, divergent evolution, and parallel evolution. We will talk about the pace of evolution, explaining gradualism and punctuated equilibrium that explains the models of evolution. So organic evolution it was for the first time challenges the theory of spatial creation. So earlier it is believed like everything is created by the god. In different mythology there are different beliefs, but ultimately someone created everything, which was totally shattered by the idea of organic evolution, which used to state the origin of new life forms from the existing life forms, and which is kind of logical here, and we have tons of evidences to support that idea. But the organic evolution idea is provided by many scientists, many researchers back then, like it was provided by Lamarck at the earlier time, then it was also provided by the Charles Darwin later. So we'll talk about that idea of Lamarckism explaining the organic evolution, and then we'll also talk about Darwin's model explaining the idea of evolution. And we now know that Darwin's model is accepted form of the model, which is supposed to be true because we have numerous evidences supporting that model. So it's kind of becoming a theory over the years. So first of all, let's talk about the idea of Lamarck. What Lamarck stated, Lamarck tried to explain the organic evolution with the help of a term known as inner want. Inner want means inherited characteristics, and little used structures can get disappeared, and the used and more used structures are going to be stretched, and the morphological or anatomical structure may be modified based on the organism's importance to survive, based on the organism's own want or inner want to survive in a certain kind of environment. That is something provided by Lamarck. Okay, so let us talk about the idea of Lamarck first, then we'll talk about the idea of Darwin. We can explain the idea of Lamarck and Darwin both with the classical example of giraffe's neck. We know giraffe have very tall neck, and how exactly all the giraffes that we can see now has this huge tall neck. And Lamarck stated that at the very beginning we have only one ancestor, that is short-necked giraffe. The ancestor of the tall-necked giraffe are those short-necked giraffes. So those short-necked giraffes are present from the beginning. Okay, so those short-necked giraffe, short-necked ancestor, they are living in a forest where there are smaller trees and long trees. And as these giraffes are short-necked, they can only eat leaves from short trees, not from the tall trees. So what happens, there is a huge competition for the food resource, and sooner all the short-necked giraffes, as they're eating from the short trees leaves are gone because they're eaten up. So only the tall trees are left, short trees are no longer there. So at this point they have a very difficult situation managing to eat food. So what they want to survive, and this idea to survive makes them trying to stretch their neck. So they're trying to stretch their neck all the time. How? They're trying to extend their neck to reach up to the taller trees, to eat the leaves from the taller tree. And this inner want to eat the leaves and survive allows them to stretch their neck, and slowly the neck is being stretched, and ultimately the neck stretched out to become a long neck. So now once they gain this information in one generation, so that particular tall neck giraffe, if they make a new offspring in the next generation, that is also going to be a tall neck one. Okay, so that is the idea of Lamarckism. So Lamarck stated the idea that that in this case the organisms, they're trying to do their job, they're trying to, they have a particular want, they have their want. For example, in this case they want to stretch their neck so that they receive the food, so that they can survive. And as they're trying to do that, their morphological structure is being altered and they gain a new character. So the gaining of a character or the origin of a new character is determined by the effort exerted by that species itself. So which was not actually true, which was proved wrong by Charles Darwin. Darwin stated that it's not going to be the same scenario, it's not going to be the case. Okay, why? Let us talk about that once in a moment. So what we talk here is, whenever Darwin observed a lot of different phenomena while he has collected specimens from different islands near Galapagos, so what he found out was remarkable, and that is, all the birds, all the finch bird he found out in different places of the Galapagos Island and the neighboring island. He found out that in all those finch, he found in those all finches there are finch, they have remarkable similarity in their structure, in their beak structure, in their in all of their body structures there are remarkable similarities. Now why such kind of similarities are present? That makes him think of an important question, that somehow all those finches, they are connected to some ancestor. And once he trying to find out that ancestor, he found out the ancestor, and he found out that most of these finches, they have exactly similar, very very similar structures and very very similar part of their body structures matching with that of their ancestor. And that gives us the idea regarding that definitely organisms that are present, they never modify, they never get one particular property, they never get one property due to their inner want. If they gain a property, that is definitely due to, because they already have that property from before. So those properties are just getting selected by nature. For example, explaining the same phenomena of long stretched neck of the giraffe by Darwinism. So Darwin stated that the ancestor was not short-necked. Yes, obviously there are short-necked ancestors are there, and there are also tall-necked giraffe are there. But all the tall-necked giraffe that we can see now, they are not exactly the results of the short-necked ancestor. What is the short-necked ancestor are not pure breeds. So the short-necked ancestor can produce one or two very few individuals which are by chance of a tall-neck type, because variation is always there. And also this is the sexual reproduction. There is always a mix and match component in the sexual reproduction that can give rise to always new variations and new combinations. So what he told us is that in the very beginning there are both the types of giraffe, short-necked as well as tall-necked giraffe, both are present. Now among them, both are trying to eat the leaves from the tree. As they're trying to eat the leaves from the tree, tall-necked giraffe as well as short-necked giraffe both can eat the leaves from short tree as well as short tree, but only tall-necked giraffe can eat the leaves of the tall tree. Now what happens, as both of them trying feeding on the short trees, sooner all the short plants are gone. Okay, so as the short plants are no longer present, then what happens? The short-necked giraffes will find it very difficult to survive because they don't get their food, while the very few tall-necked giraffe which were present even before, they are getting the advantage, because that short-necked giraffe are dead due to not getting the food. So this tall-necked giraffe, they can easily get the food because of this tall stretched neck. They can take the food from the longer trees. So sooner what happens, in that population there is a shift. Earlier more short-necked giraffe are present, less tall-necked giraffe are present, but now due to this natural selection, because in this case nature selects tall-necked giraffe to survive and to reproduce, because they can eat their food, but short-necked giraffe cannot. So the tall-necked giraffe are selected. So now those tall-necked giraffe will reproduce and interbreed and produce many new offspring which are all tall necked in nature. So in every single generation, once we look at the reproduction, the short necked giraffes are killed and the tall necked giraffes are selected. Sooner that population of giraffe is converted into a tall necked stretched version of the giraffe. So now when we can see the giraffe, they are all very tall necked. So this is the Darwinian idea of evolution. So what Darwin stated is that short neck to tall neck is not a conversion. It's not possible. So if someone wants to do something and they're stretching for it, it's not going to modify the morphological structure. And even if modifies the structure, it's not going to be passed from that generation to the next generation. If that's the case, then obviously a good writer's son and daughter will be a good writer, a good cricketer's son and daughter will always be a good cricketer. That's not the case. It does not work like that, because the upward changes, the habits that we acquire is based on the work, based on our practice and work. It's nothing to deal with the hereditary transfer of those features from one generation to the next. So the evolution works in this way, that all the time there is only one particular feature that is there. Multiple features are there, because that is the idea of variation. In a population, there are different variations are there. For one particular character, there are thousands of variations possible in nature. And among those thousands of variations, nature selects the fittest or the best fit variation of all. So that's why the term is used, known as the survival of the fittest. So among this, this is a race, and the individuals who is most fit to the environment will the race. Now if I ask you what we mean by this fittest, because survival of the fittest term is used, fit means what? The fitness is calculated by the lifetime reproductive outcome of an organism. So that's why reproductive potential is a very important thing. So reproductive potential is potential for a rapid expansion of a species in a given geographical area. Okay, so a species will fill a niche until it reaches a climax. Okay, that's the idea of the. So fitness is calculated by the reproductive potential of the animal. Okay, so the animal which is reproductively more reproductive potential to make new offsprings are more fit to the environment. Okay, but this term survival of the fittest is actually coined by Herbert Spencer, not by Darwin himself. But Darwin used this term to explain the phenomena and outcome of the natural selection. But what Darwin observed was quite simple, but it's difficult to understand back then. But now we know how exactly it is true, and we know that the idea of Charles Darwin is very clear, very simple, and that is nature selects one over the other. Okay, that's why nature's selection or natural selection, that's how it works. Okay, so just like artificial selection that we do for our sake, for example, when you look at the dog breeds and stuff like that, we do artificial selection. But in this case, we're talking about the nature's selection. It's not the artificial selection here, it's the nature selection or natural selection. The way we select few properties of a dog to keep and few properties not to keep, thus producing different types of dog breeds. The same way nature also do this kind of selection. It's known as the natural selection. Okay, so what are the modes of evolution? So evolution can give rise to different phenomena, different outcomes. It can be transformation, shifting from one to the other phase. Second thing is speciation. Third, extinction. Fourth, adaptive radiation. 5, we'll also talk about the types of the radiation, like divergent, parallel, convergent. We'll talk about that. So let's first talk about the transformation. So this is the first mode of evolution, transformation. Transformation means we are talking about change in morphology. Organisms altered from one type of morphological structures to other type of structures. They are gaining new morphological structure. Just the one we discussed earlier. This giraffes, they gain a new morphological structure. But Darwin stated that they are not gaining a new morphological structure. Individuals with that morphological structure is always there. But that long stretch giraffe is selected. That morphological structure is selected over the short-necked giraffe. That's one thing. And now once it's selected, that means that individual will get the chance to reproduce, and as they reproduce, they also produce more and more similar offspring. Okay, so transformation means change of properties, so that over the time it wants to be called something else. We can call it something totally different over the course of the time. So this transformation can take place in two different manner. Manner number one is the transformation can be very slow but gradual. Very slow but gradual modification, while it may also take place like rapid. So these are the difference between the two. So the one with very slow and gradual transformation, we call it gradualism or gradualistic model of evolution, and the other one, which is of rapid change, we call them punctuated model or punctuated equilibrium. Now, what are the difference between the two? If you look at this graph, it will be much clear for you. You can see here that in both the graph we have morphology present in the x-axis and time period present in the y-axis. So what we can see with changing time, how exactly that morphological structure is going to be altered. And what we can see here in the very first case of gradualistic model, in the gradualistic model you can see that the modification is being made slowly. So this is one particular morphology structure, then morphology structure slowly start to be modified over the time, and that's why we have the structure something, it looks something like, you know, like a tree, the branches of a tree, something like that. While this one, punctuated equilibrium, explain is totally differently. For example, if you look at punctuated equilibrium, for a long stretch of time, let's say for this duration of years, there was no visible morphology change, whatsoever, and from that there's a sudden morphology change, and then again slow, no change at all, then a sudden morphology change, then no change at all, a sudden morphology change, and it continues like that. So punctuated equilibrium will give a drawing something like, you know, straight lines connected in branches. The branch point is the place where a sudden morphology change is resulted. Now, a sudden change is not always possible. Generally, sudden change is present in very small population and very big catastrophic events. So due to catastrophic events or due to mass scale events, by the nature, this kind of changes are possible. So it's very rare to see this kind of punctuated equilibrium. So punctuated equilibrium fails to explain most of the common mode of evolution. It explains only few. It can be explaining with only few occasions, while gradualistic model explains the process of evolution far better. In fact, most of the process of evolution is being explained by this gradualistic model.